What sort of reception did you get after all that?
From some people, I got a chilly reception. One in particular, James Sloppy Floyd, I think never could get along with the idea that I was there, because he was one of the movers to throw me out. He had been involved with the VFW. He was very patriotic, as many Southerners are, and just the idea of my being there just drove him the wrong way. So I could never get along with him. But most politicians, I think, are people who don't hold grudges for a long time. If they can get along with you some way or the other and they can get something out of it, okay with them. And I found out quickly that while there's a period when people wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't talk to me, that passed, and people began to look upon me as a vote. I was a vote. I could vote for them, I could vote against them, and it's better for them if I'd vote for them, and they could find some way to do that. My favorite story is I was sitting in the legislature and a guy behind me, I don't remember who he was, what his name was, a bill came up to vote an appropriation for autistic children. This when autism was not well known or talked about, and this bill came up, he said, Bond, you should vote for this. So I voted for it. I looked up the tally sheet, the sign, and he had voted against it. I said, why'd you vote against it? He said, Bond, we have too many artistic children in Georgia.
That's no endorsement of the Georgia General Assembly.
No.
I'd like to ask this question.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a rumor that the governor and the speaker had offered you a chance just to step aside.
You know, Bob,
avoid that.
I have a terrible memory, but I don't remember that, and I think I would remember that if it happened.
Yeah.
Leroy Johnson, you remember, who was the single black legislator then,
Right.
had told me that he had been told that if I would apologize, then everything would be okay.
Yeah.
But I wasn't going to do that. So,
What sort of committee assignments did you get?
I got pretty good at committee assignments. I don't remember what they were in the House, but they were pretty good at committee assignments. I wasn't on the birthday committee or anything like that. And I grew to love it and enjoy it. I enjoyed it very much. You know, when you can introduce a bill and get it passed, that's a great thing.
Right.
Great thing. When you can change people's lives, and you can do in a state legislature, you can do it so much quicker than you can in the Congress. Mm-hmm. It was great.
Yeah. After service in the House, you decided to run for the Senate.
Yeah, it was like stepping upstairs.
Going upstairs.
Yeah.
Tell us about that election.
Well, I don't remember much about it, except the time came, I could do it. There was an opening, I can't remember who I succeeded. Do you?
Horace Ward.
Horace Ward must have stepped up to a judgeship.
Yes.
That's right, creating a vacancy. And I decided to run, and because I was already well known in a third of the district, so I thought to get well known, the other 2/3 wouldn't be that hard. It wasn't that hard, and I enjoyed it. And the Senate, it's true. The Senate to me was I don't want to say a better class of people, but different people who seem to have different views about things. Mm-hmm. Not as strong as passions weren't as strong in the Senate as they were in the House. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In your first term in the House, you had the duty to select the governor between Lester Maddox, the well-known segregationist, and Bo Calloway, the well-known Republican segregationist. You remember how you voted?
I think I abstained, which really is a coward's way out. I was so conscious of having been put out myself, because later we had a matter involving a member of the Senate, Roscoe Dean, who question came up about expelling him. And I felt so strongly that, it was wrong to have done this to me. It was probably wrong to do it to him, and I think I voted to keep him there. Or maybe not. Maybe I voted to put him out. I thought what he had done was egregious. Yeah. He had lied on his expense slips. And what he had done was really wrong, and what I had done was not wrong. So they weren't comparable situations, but I felt very, very torn by it, being asked to do to him what had been done to me.
I think that was the time that he got expenses for driving to the Bahamas.
Yes, I believe so. And it was as if he drove back to Savannah and back to Atlanta every day.
Yeah.
Which of course you can't do. You could do, I guess, but why would you?
It'd be a long trip.
Yeah.
By the way, how would you rate Lester Maddox as a governor?
Well, he was really a conundrum, a mixed guy. My favorite Lester Maddox story is that the Georgia black legislators went to see him to ask him about a number of things. And one of them was getting black people on draft boards in Georgia. The governor put people on draft boards, and there were no black people on the draft board. So we said, Governor Maddox, we want you to name some black people to the draft boards. He said, you all fight in the Army, don't you? I said, yes. He said, well, you should be on the draft board. I mean, to him, it was that simple.
Yeah.
And to him, you know, I always thought he was more complex than we thought, than people thought he was.
Then you ran for Congress.
Yeah. I ran for Congress. I had, for 2 times, going through 2 withdrawings of districts, I had played a role. A minor role the first time and a major role the second time. And I helped draw a district that I thought would elect me to the Congress of the United States. I created it carefully. I waited until all my colleagues in the Senate had drawn districts around Atlanta. Atlanta was like a donut hole. And then I went to work on the 2 districts left in the middle in Fulton and DeKalb counties and created 2 districts, one of them for me. And I decided to run for Congress. And my old friend, John Lewis, whom I'll see tonight, decided he would run. And I was just astounded he would do it because he had just been reelected to a city council term. And I couldn't imagine somebody getting reelected to office and giving that office up immediately afterward. I just couldn't think it would happen. But he did it. And of course, he had a right to. He could do what he wanted to. And it became a bitter, bitter campaign. He made allegations against me or asked me to take a drug test. And I had a philosophical objection to drug tests. I have it now. I had it then, but I have it now. And I wouldn't do it, and I think he used that against me effectively. And he carried all of the white votes in the district and a small number of the black votes. I carried all the black votes and a tiny number of the white votes, and he won.
Runoff.
He runoff. Yeah, he ran in a runoff.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things I remember about your activities, and there have been many, was your performance at the 1968 National Democratic Convention, where you challenged the governor's delegation.
Georgia then picked delegations to Democratic conventions by having the governor name them, or the party chairman name them, really, which meant the governor. And Georgia had picked a delegation in a state that was a quarter black, picked a delegation that was overwhelmingly white, I think 3 black people in it, and a delegation that included people pledged to vote for George Wallace, who was not running as a Democrat, but as a third-party candidate. So it was undemocratic in many different ways. And with Taylor Branch, the author, and another guy who was a classmate of Taylor's, we decided that we would create a delegation that at least had one person in it who would vote for Eugene McCarthy, because we were fans of Eugene McCarthy. Taylor went to UNC. McCarthy had spoken at UNC, and he had fallen in love with him. And so we created a delegation. We had a convention in Macon. We created a delegation drawn from each of the congressional districts in Georgia. It was racially integrated. It was split between Robert Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and somebody else, I think, and McCarthy. So it was fairly apportioned to the Democratic candidates running for president. And we went to Chicago. Taylor and I, and Parker Hudson, that's the other guy's name, went to Chicago to break the way for us. And we stayed in we got the last room in the Conrad Hilton Hotel. I got the last room in the Conrad Hilton Hotel after spending one night at the YMCA. Don't ever do that, Bob. Don't ever spend it. It's awful. Anyway, remember the song YMCA? Tells you something. Anyway, we were looking for hotel rooms for our delegation and buses to take us back from the hotel to the convention center. And we just couldn't find a place anywhere. A convention was coming to Chicago. There were no rooms that we had. This black guy recognized me and stopped us, asked us if he could help. We told him about it. He said, "Have you tried this hotel?" We said, "Yeah, we've been there. They don't have any rooms." He said, "Let me try." He went in, came out 15 minutes later. He said, "I got the rooms." I said, "Wow, that's great, but we don't have any money to pay for them." He said, "Why don't you ask my boss?" I said, "Who's your boss?" He said, "Elijah Muhammad." I See, Elijah Muhammad, he calls white people blue-eyed devils. He doesn't allow his members to vote. Why would he give us money for this? He said, you try him. So I went over there, had dinner with him, left Taylor at home. Came back the next day. He said, come back the next day. Came back the next day, and he had dinner again, and it's his patriarchal religion, so the women sit over here and the men sit over here. And he said to the group, he said, this young man wants some money to bring his people from Georgia up to here. What should we do? And the women, almost to a woman, said no. So we don't know him. He'll give his money to the devils. We don't trust him, and we don't do that. We don't vote. We don't play politics. Then he asked the men, they were mixed, sort of yes and no. He said to me, Mr. Bond, in the Nation of Islam, we listen to the women. He said, we do what the men say do. And he gave me $3,000 in $100 bills. I wired it to Atlanta, and all our people came up. And eventually, the Credentials Committee decided to split the Georgia delegation in half of the regulars, half of us. The regulars were so mad, most of them went home, leaving us with most of the seats. And then later, I was nominated for Vice President of the United States, but I was too young. I was below the age and had to decline.
Very great story. You know, the outcome of that event in Chicago, I think Lester Maddox walked out of the convention.
Yes, he did. Went home.
And I think 2 or 3 of our Georgia's elected constitutional officers switched parties.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that, but they became
that early.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember that.
But anyway, it was quite a time in our career, in your career.
Yeah.
Okay. After a long career in the civil rights movement and in politics, is there anything that you would like to go back and tell us about that we haven't discussed?
There are probably things I'll think about later when we've parted, and probably best unsaid. No, but I've had a wonderful career, and just saying that sounds like getting ready to die tomorrow, which I don't plan to do. But I've had a wonderful life so far, and think it's going to be wonderful in the future. So I can't think of anything else, no.
I'd like to ask you about the integration at the University of Georgia, and if you had a role in that with Donald Hollowell.
I didn't have a role in it, but my brother-in-law, Howard Moore, was a young lawyer then, and he was just starting practicing with Don Hollowell. And so I was sort of on the edge of that. And I remember going down to Georgia, the University of Georgia, as a reporter for the Atlanta Inquirer, and either accompanying Hollowell or traveling beside or in a caravan with him, and going to the university as he and Charlene, I think, applied for admission. Charlene Hunter, who became the first black student with Hamilton Holmes to go to Georgia. And I remember going to the campus with Hollowell, not with Hollowell, I don't know what circumstance put me with him there. I wasn't in the same car. And seeing him go in the registrar's office and come back out, and big hubbub, a lot of reporters, and pictures being taken and so on. And I had an inkling that something bad could happen here with this much excitement about this. I didn't think it'd be as bad as it was, but I sort of said to myself, something bad can happen here. Mm-hmm. These people are too excited.
Mm-hmm. But the Governor Vandiver finally agreed to integrate the university.
Yes, yeah.
But you know, and I'm sure you remember this, Horace Ward was the first African American to apply. Yes. And was denied.
Right, and then went to law school out of the state because he couldn't go in Georgia, and got to come back and argue for Charlene. That's a poetic justice.
It is, yeah. What can modern day activists learn from civil rights veterans like you?
I think they have to learn perseverance. You have to keep trying and trying and trying and trying and never give up. You have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and never give up. I think there's a tendency today to look at the Eyes on the Prize videos, the documentary about the civil rights movement, and most of what you see is Martin Luther King having press conferences. And you think, hey, that's the way to do it. Why don't we have a press conference? Well, maybe you want to have that now and then, but that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to work. What these documentaries don't show you is the people knocking on doors, registering voters, doing the hard work that created a movement, that brought people from various interests together, that built coalitions. You don't see that. And that's what you have to do today. Mm-hmm. I think we've lost the ability to do that.
You were one of the founders and served as president of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tell us about that.
The Southern Poverty Law Center was started by two men, Joe Levin and Morris Dees in Montgomery. They were lawyers and friends, had gone to Alabama law school, and they decided that there's a need for a public interest law firm that would deal on initially poverty issues, because hence the name Southern Poverty Law Center. But they quickly saw that the real issue was race, and that race was the predominant issue, and they need to focus on that. Now they focus on many things, but that was the question. And Mars came to see me. We had lunch at Pascal's in Atlanta, and this is young white Alabama guy, whom I was a little wary of him. I'd never met him before, and he told me what he was going to do, and he wanted me to be the president. And I said, what are the duties? He said, well, you have to sign the fundraising letters. I said, fundraising letters? He said, yeah. He said, I intend to raise the money by raising direct mail. I said, really? He said, yeah. And what I did not know, and later found out, is that he was a genius at direct mail. That he told me he had sold cars in the mail. Now, can you imagine that, Bob? Mm-hmm. Selling cars through the mail? He had done it. It's just remarkable. I just got a letter from him, not from him, yesterday, signed by Toni Morrison, the great author. In past years, I got a letter from Rosa Parks that he had gotten Rosa Parks signed. Rosa Parks worked for the NAACP. I was chairman of the NAACP. We never got her to sign a letter for us. And here's Morris Dees getting her to sign letters for him. Anyway, so Morris turned out to be a genius at this and was able to raise money and build an endowment of about $50 million today, and built a staff. And for a long time, or rather a short time, the woman whom I'm now married to worked for Morris as a lawyer, and had a case that she took to the Supreme Court under Morris's tutelage. So the association has just been wonderful for me, and I'm happy for it.
Good. Let's go back to This Is Your Life, Julian Bond, to a point after the congressional race. What happened chronologically after that?
After that, I my marriage began to fall apart, and I filed for divorce and got divorced. I had to give up my legislative seat when I ran for Congress, and having lost the congressional race and given up the legislative seat, I literally was unemployed. I was able to earn a small amount of money by making speeches, so I wasn't, penniless, but I wasn't doing all that well anyway. And I began to get an offer to teach at American University, where we are right now, in DC. And I was also doing a TV show here called America's Black Forum, and I would come up here, say, once every other week, and come up and do two shows. This is a low rent TV show. Do two shows. And I reconnected with this woman who had worked for the Southern Poverty Law Center, and we decided to marry, and we did, and I decided to move here to be with her, and and the thing about American University came later. Began teaching at American University, also taught at Williams College for a semester, taught at Harvard for a semester, then taught at Drexel and Penn for a semester, Drexel in the afternoon, Penn at night, then back at Harvard for a semester. Then got an invitation to teach at the University of Virginia, and they didn't make it permanent. There were no permanent jobs, but made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and so I began teaching there. And so today I teach at American on Mondays and University of Virginia on Tuesdays, and in the spring I'll retire from Virginia, and I'm happy to say that they have offered to create a Julian Bond Chair in Civil Rights Studies, for which I'm trying to raise money right now. So if you hear of anybody who has some to give, tell them to get in touch with me.
Okay. Well, you also have served for a number of years as the chairman of the NAACP.
Right. After the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee disappeared, I looked around. The NAACP was the only civil rights organization standing. And I re-entered it because I had been a member of the NAACP while I was in college. I was not active in it, but I was a member. And I became a member again of the Atlanta NAACP, and we were lucky enough in Atlanta to have this marvelous woman named John Dale Johnson, who was the executive director. So being the chairman, or president rather, of the NAACP was a relatively easy job because she ran the NAACP in Atlanta. And we had a wonderful, wonderful NAACP, and she encouraged me to run for the board. And I ran for the board of NAACP, and I won, and served a couple of terms. And then I got into a dispute with the then chairman, and he ran somebody against me, and I was beaten and defeated off the board, got back on the board again, challenged him, helped defeat him, helped elect Myrlie Evers Williams as his successor. She served 2 terms, and then when she stepped down, I was asked to take her place, and I did, and I got elected to the board again and got elected chairman of the board and served for 11 years. Chairmen have 1-year terms, so I served 11 terms, and then stepped down, and a bright young woman named Rosalind Brock succeeded me, and I'm now chairman emeritus. I've been kicked upstairs, but luckily I have few responsibilities and not much to do.
Good. If you will, please go back with me to SNCC again. I'd like to get your views on what happened to SNCC, how it changed from the organization that you knew into a Black Power type organization, and why you resigned.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee changed over time in many ways, most of them positive, I think. It began as this coordinating agency, then it became an organization with a staff that did things itself. But the time came in the 60s when Black Power sentiment was about, and it began to grow inside the organization. And there were great disputes within the organizations about what way we ought to do. Some people said Black Power is perfectly innocuous, which is a position I held. It's not horrible, it's not bad. It simply means black people running their own things. In other words, black people ought to be able to run the cities where they're a majority of. If they're the majority in the county, they ought to be able to run the county, and so forth and so on. Well, people thought this Black Power meant white exclusion. It never meant that to me, and I don't think it meant that to most of us. But in the organization, there were great disputes about what the course of action ought to be. And eventually, there was a vote within the organization. We were super democratic in SNCC on what to do next. And the question was, what should the white people who work for SNCC do? Should they continue working in Black America as they had done and done well and done effectively? Or should they work in white America where the problem is? It's not black people aren't racist. It's white people who are racist. If we could straighten them out, things would be okay. So we said they ought to work there, and we had a vote on this. The white people who work for SNCC wouldn't vote. And so therefore the proposition carried without their votes, would have been defeated with their votes, and many of them decided to leave the organization. Then we elected Stokely Carmichael as the chairman, and he was a firebrand, a hot guy. He eventually wrote a book, which if you read it today about Black Power, you say, oh, that makes sense to me. But at the time, he let other people tell the public what it meant, and all their explanations were hostile and angry and anti-white. And so this became a bad thing. So the organization began to go into demise and eventually just went away. Mm-hmm. It's a sad thing because we need something like it today.
Julian, how often do you think about those days?
All the time, because I teach it all the time and I see the people all the time. There's a big colony of SNCC people here in Atlanta where I am. I'm going to be with John Lewis tonight with Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's our delegate to the Congress from DC, and she worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I'm going to take a civil rights tour beginning in March, beginning in Atlanta, and I'll see John there again, and on the trip I'll see other SNCC people, other movements. So I see these people all the time. This was a magic moment in my life, working for this organization. Being in the Georgia legislature was an enormous pleasure, and I enjoyed it a great deal. Being chairman of the NAACP was a wonderful thing. Very few people get to do that. But the time I spent with SNCC was really a high point in my life. We had a reunion in April of last year, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, yeah, because it was our 50th. So it would have been 2010, yeah, okay. And it was, we expected 300 people to come, 1,000 came. And to see these people with whom I'd spent so much time working for civil rights, some of it risky, some of it just a lot of fun, to see them again was just the highlight of my life. It's wonderful. I've never had, it was better than my college reunions, my high school reunions. It was the best time I've ever had.
If you had not devoted your life to racial equality, what do you think you would have been?
I don't know. I had been interested in being a journalist, so I think I might have shifted toward journalism. But who would hire me, I don't know. You know, I worked for this little black newspaper, which is a lot of fun, but that was not a living. It was working.
Right. How would you like to be remembered?
Two ways. I've always thought my headstone, I want a double-sided headstone. On one side, I wanted to say race man, and that means a man who doesn't dislike other races, but who's proud of his own and wants to lift it up. The other side is going to say easily amused. That's the way I want to be remembered.
Well, you've certainly had a wonderful career.
Well, thank you.
Anything else you'd like to talk about?
As I say, I can't remember anything, no.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Julian Bond.
Thank you.